Good day, dear viewers. Just a quick little introduction to A Form of Sound Words' very first interview. As many of you know, my channel is as amateur as you can get. I'm using an old work laptop, an old T3i camera, and lots of freeware to bring you this content. This is why I am so thankful to my brother in the Lord, Danny, who accepted to be the guinea pig as I attempted my very first online interview. As you can imagine, there were technical difficulties and a big boomer moment when, 20 minutes into the interview, I realized I hadn't pressed the record button. Danny took it all in stride, smile on his face, showed tons of grace, and we just took it from the top. So if you're wondering why I'm mumbling to myself and laughing at the beginning of the interview, and you'll even notice a little grin on Danny's face, that's why. So again, a big thank you to Danny, and I truly hope you enjoy our discussion on Danny's excellent book, Scar Tissue. Good day, dear viewers. Welcome to A Form of Sound Words, and we have a really special show for you today. I'd like to welcome my guest, Mr. Danny Covey. He's a graphic designer, an illustrator, marketer, art instructor, video producer, and published author. He's my brother in the Lord and a fellow church member at Cross Point Baptist Church. Danny, welcome to A Form of Sound Words.
Luke, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Danny, to get things started, I was wondering if you would give us your origin story, where life started for you, and start walking us through the amazing trajectory of your life. The winds of destiny blew pretty hard in your direction and took you in all sorts of interesting places. So please kick us off and be prepared for me to interrupt you from time to time to get some more details.
All right. Well, I'll start off with it's a quote from Richard Paul Evans. And the quote says this: "Usually life's greatest gifts come wrapped in adversity." And that has proven true in my own life. So just a really brief intro. I'm the husband to one fantabulous wife, the father to 3 amazing kids, but also the survivor of 8 open heart surgeries.
8
open heart surgeries. And really, to tell my story, I really have to begin with not where it started for me, but where it began for my parents. My dad is a retired pastor. He pastored for 50 plus years. My mom now is a retired nurse. But really, their life changed drastically in 1977. I was born in 1976, and at just a few months old, I was playing one day and I just flopped over, completely stopped breathing. My parents were terrified. They rushed to the hospital, not breathing at all in the car, by the way, for 20 some minutes. And they revived me. And, they didn't know what really had caused it. They thought, well, maybe he had choked on some food. And so that was strange, and they didn't know what to make of it. But okay, that was a one-off thing, and back home we go. But unfortunately, that episode, that they would call them, happened again and again and again.
Now,
multiple times.
Now, this speaks to the resiliency of infants, right? Like for one of us to go 20 minutes without breathing, I mean, you show up at the hospital, you're done, right? Yeah. But again, like it's hard to fathom, but infants are extraordinarily resilient that way. But still, we are talking about life and death here. We're talking about you are not just in minor distress, you're in extreme distress.
Yeah. And like this happened multiple times. And my parents, over this time they went to doctor and cardiologist after cardiologist. They'd listen. They didn't know what was wrong, but I'm incredibly grateful. My parents just would not quit. And it was the 11th cardiologist that put his stethoscope on, listened to my heart, and he said, "Get this boy to Sick Kids Hospital."
So I'm looking at the chapter in question right now in your book,
Mhm.
and just because I feel like this doctor, the 11th one, is well deserving of some kudos. I have a Dr. Michael J. Tyrell,
Tyrell, yes, that's
pediatric
Tyrell.
cardiology unit at Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon.
He was the one. And actually, in writing the book, it took me a lot of time, several months, just to track down who he was. My parents actually didn't remember either, but he was the one that kind of kicked off, "Hey, this is what's going on." And so I had I guess it was a first open heart surgery. It was called a catheterization. And based on the results of that heart catheterization, they realized I had problems with my aortic valve and my mitral valve. And so my parents were told, "Get to Sick Kids Hospital." We lived in Regina, Saskatchewan at the time, and they flew clear across the country to get there for a fighting chance to save my life.
So Regina, Saskatchewan to Toronto would probably be what, a 2 hour flight, I would imagine, at least a 2 hour flight.
I'll tell you, I can't remember, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's a long flight.
yeah. So like because I flew into Calgary there last year and it was about 3 hours, and that's just a little further, but still,
Mhm.
so it's not next door, and this
Yeah,
is the 1970s.
yeah. So they flew. They were met by ambulances at the airport. I was taken to Sick Kids Hospital, and the surgery that was required was at the time very experimental. And so they had made this mad dash to get to fly across the country, rushed into the hospital. But of course, there's other kids already in surgery that are in crisis, so they get top priority. So I was there several days before I actually had the surgery and was only given a 20% chance to live.
And again, for effect, this is the 1970s.
Mhm.
You are an infant, right? So we're talking about major heart surgery on an infant in the 1970s. Um, I also like there's one thing that I want to bring up real fast. We're going to look at it
Yep.
later, but I want to bring it up right now just because of the timing of your story. You show up in Toronto. You're from Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
You have people there waiting for you. You have people there who are going to become very significant people in your life. Can you speak a little bit as to like who was waiting, who was there, who was prepared to basically help this, what is essentially dying infant?
Yeah. It's amazing to have brothers and sisters in Christ. When we have that unity in Christ, I can fly somewhere else in the world and we have a bond. My parents flew to Sick Kids Hospital, not knowing anyone, knowing nothing. And they're in a room, and in walk two people from a local church that had heard about what we were going through. And their sole reason to be there was to pray with us, to be a help to my parents, offer them a place to stay. And those people, that first meeting has led to and I don't even know how many years friendship from there. Um, it's been a long time, but they formed a bond with Ray and Melody Foote, who have been there through most of my surgeries or visited. But yeah, they just walked in cold and said, "Hey, you're a brother in Christ. We're going to pray for you. You're a sister in Christ. We're going to help you. We're praying for your boy. Our church is praying." And really, churches all across Canada and the United States prayed. And that's that's why I'm here. It's a testament to the power of prayer.
So we're gonna talk about Ray and Melody a little later, but let's walk through. You're in Sick Kids now. You're waiting in the queue. Your time comes. What happens?
So it was experimental surgery. Several family members were telling my parents, look, you need to be realistic. You need to plan the funeral. This is likely not going to work. And my parents did all that. They did plan, like, what if things didn't happen? They would pray at night and they'd cry, and then they'd pray and they'd cry. But my dad recalls in the middle of the night praying, and Psalm 112. Oh, I'm going to get the reference wrong. But basically, my heart is fixed. I'm not afraid of bad news. I'm not afraid of evil tidings. And when my dad read that, Psalm 112, 6 and 7, when he read that, he had peace. They went to sleep. But my parents did plan if things didn't go well. But my mom, to her credit, went to a local shopping center and bought me clothes in anticipation. Hey, my boy's going to get better, and I'm going to put these on him.
It is such a mother thing to do. Like I'm serious. You know, like I see my mom doing that. I would see my wife doing that. It is just such a mom thing to do. I
Yep.
love it. I love it.
So I won't ruin the ending, but I did make it. And but really that was, I think, my parents' introduction to what would become a lifetime of just, this is a trial that our family is going to face. And from there, I had a period of time between 1978 and 1985 where, for me as a kid, life was normal. No surgeries. I would have a yearly checkup. But around, I think it would have been age 7, the doctors, I was monitored once a year. And the doctors felt, you know what, we need to just do a catheterization on your heart just to take a closer look and see how things are going.
So they decided this procedure. Now, you say that for these 7 years, things kind of run normal. I have to imagine some care is being taken here, right? Like you as an infant had open heart surgery.
Right.
Like, how did that impact those early growing up years? Like what care was taken to ensure your safety and your recovery given this, what was at the time, major surgery?
Yeah, I think um, within our family dynamic, I got maybe a little bit special treatment because, oh, Danny can't do that. He might get hurt. And, that did create a bit of friction with my siblings because, I was very young when I had that first surgery, but now I was the porcelain child that we didn't want to have break.
Yeah.
And so there was some family dynamics with that. And I should say during this time too, I was never allowed to do sports or participate in gym.
Hmm. Which
And
I have to imagine as a young child is difficult.
it was tough because it meant there's a lot of, growing up with what a lot of kids say, this is normal part of childhood. I just didn't grow up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, I love to draw, and drawing, my imagination, that was my escape. So I would spend hours just drawing page after page of cartoons or Transformers or G.I. Joe. Like that was my world in my head. That was just an escape from all of that.
We're going to talk about the Hasbro years, don't you worry. So we have this appointment. We're gonna check and see what's happening, make sure everything's fine. And they
Yep.
discover.
So the surgery was done, and my parents recall they saw the doctor enter the room, and they could tell just by his body language something's wrong. And what they found was that in the first surgery, I'd been diagnosed with a mitral valve problem and an aortic valve problem. That mitral valve had been fixed. My aortic valve was too narrow and it would keep shrinking. And so in the first surgery, they would try and open it up. what they found now is it was starting to shrink again. So it meant that if left unattended, I would go into congestive heart failure, and that would eventually lead to death. So not long after that catheterization, they said, look, he's got to have another heart surgery. And that was
So,
scheduled 1985. And sure enough, within the months from the catheterization to the surgery, I began to put on a lot of weight from fluid retention. I would faint, I would pass out, even climbing up the stairs. My dad recalls he'd have to carry me up the stairs because I just couldn't do it. And I'd have an oxygen tank that I had to carry around with me to church, to school. It was, from my perspective, I'm in poor health, but you're also very self-conscious as a kid too.
yeah.
So that was a challenging time.
So what I appreciate again in the book is just this timing of them checking, seeing something wrong, and then almost like to the day you start experiencing symptoms of what's going wrong. So in other words, like the timing was, it's not like you were at death's door and then something happened. No, they saw it coming and probably
Yeah,
got things in motion, which is praise God.
yeah.
Let's just say. So
So
basically, at this point, you're going under the knife again.
yeah. So it was, I believe, September, not 1985, around there. Actually, it was my parents' anniversary, September 3rd, 1985. I had my second open heart surgery. This is the first open heart surgery that I actually remember.
Mm.
I'd
Mhm.
grown up with scars on my body. I'd heard the stories about how they got there, but I never knew. And so this was you know, really coming face to face with the idea of death and like what did I understand even at a young age? But praise God, I was in the hospital about 3 weeks. There were some there were some things that happened during that time, but by God's grace, I survived.
So, um, this is the part of the book that really affected me. You're very descriptive in, like you say, this was the first time you understood where the scars came from. You understood the health problems that you were experiencing. You felt them now. You're
Hmm.
running this through your mind. You're thinking of all the implications of what is going to happen. So it's you know it's sad for the parents holding that infant on the plane, taking them to sick kids. But now there's a third person who's really worried, and that third person is you,
Yeah.
right? Now, I want to bring Gaylord up.
Okay.
You speak of Gaylord in the book. I would like for you to introduce the audience to Gaylord, because to me, the way you write in the book, you just have these two stories nearly identical. The conclusions are different, but
Hmm.
there's the nice edge right there, right? There's the nice edge where one has one outcome, the other one has another outcome, and one home goes, what, sorry, yeah, one family goes back to a dark home, and one
Yeah.
family goes back with the joy of the Lord. So I please just share this story, because I think it's a really human story. It's a really powerful story, really.
Yeah. So typically when you get to the hospital as a kid, you're there a couple days early. It's just to get you acquainted with the room, make you comfortable. You're meeting the nurses, they're doing tests. And so pre-surgery, I had some time. And there was another boy I'd met there named Gaylord he was about my age. We would draw together. His surgery was somewhat similar to mine. And I think his surgery was scheduled, I think, just a few hours after mine. So the doctors come in when it's time and they put your bed rails up and you're with your parents and they wheel you down the hall to the elevators. And you're parked at the elevators. And that's really where you say your goodbyes. From there, the doors open, the team, surgeons go in, and those doors close, and that's it. So from there, I'm taken to surgery. My parents are there, and that is that's a very hard walk to do with a young child. Gaylord had his surgery, shortly after mine, and my parents were there when they're walking. Gaylord's parents are walking him down the hallway, and they're stopped. The doors open, and Gaylord goes in, and they're saying their goodbyes. And just as the doors are closing, Gaylord reaches out and calls for his mom, and then shuts. And my parents recall his parents just broke down. Like, it was very difficult, very emotional. Of course, I was unaware of all this. I'm having my surgery. I'm, several days later, I'm back on the ward, and his room was kind of across from mine. I went over to his room, and his room is empty. And by empty, I don't mean just he's not there. I mean, the lights are off, the sheets are taken off. It is empty. And what we'd found is that Gaylord had passed away in surgery. And even as a young kid, just that's my first real brush with death, or being familiar with death. And I think even there, even at a young age, that's partly where the seeds of survivor's guilt starts in my own life. It's just having that as a memory that's just baked in there forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that account as a father. I'm a well-established father at this point, and I read that part of your book as a father, and I have trouble understanding how I would ever live outside of that moment in front of those elevators. How do you break away from that, from the awfulness of that moment? And it's a moment that comes and goes, and it sets destiny, right? Like, it sets the tone of the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I so appreciate the power of those two stories together, because it's wonderful, as you say, that you're here. It's wonderful that you're here. I'm glad to know. I'm glad to know Gaylord. I'm really glad to know what happened to him, and for me to care enough to shed a few tears for him when I read your book. Anyways, so you come out of surgery.
Mm-hmm.
How aware were you, first of all, that you had survived, and like, what were your thoughts waking up from that surgery, and I assume seeing your parents, or whoever was in your entourage at that point?
It's hard to say definitively, because what happens is you wake up and you're back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You wake up for a minute and you're back to sleep. What happened there would be what I would do as a pattern when I was awake and coherent. I'd ring the buzzer, and my first two questions are, what day is it? And how did it go?
Yeah.
Because even being put to sleep, and I wake up, I don't know how to explain it other than I was keenly aware that time had gone by.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a dream where you fall asleep and you wake up a second later, and as I knew there was a gap, there was something missing. So I was told the surgery went well. It was about 2 days later. And so you're in intensive care unit for a few days. And then when you're well enough, you get moved back onto the ward. So in my case, my surgery, my recovery went well. What the surgeons had sought out to do was accomplished. And that began my road to recovery. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks.
And I can only imagine, as a child, children move, children want to,
Yeah.
you know, I can imagine those were difficult weeks to have the scars, the pain, just the discomfort of it all.
Yeah, and it was very difficult. In some ways, I think it was good to have the catheterization before as kind of like a little preview.
Mm,
But yeah, it was very difficult, and this was imprinted like this is what heart surgery is.
mm.
But again, praise God, I survived and I recovered. Um, we had driven. I'm looking back. It was such a long drive. We had driven from Regina to Toronto. Well, now was the long drive back. I don't remember exactly how many days, but it was a good week of driving.
That
And
would
in
be
the
quite like even
yeah,
today, that a drive from Toronto to Regina is quite the drive.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
was, it was the 80s too, so no car seats. It was just because it hurt just to even sit up or have anything on my chest. I laid down in the back seat most of the way just so I could have some relief.
So, historical context, you just gave it right there. We are now in the mid 80s,
Yes.
right? We're in the mid 80s. You drive back to Regina, you get to Regina, and the phone is ringing.
hmm
Why is the phone ringing?
This is something that I remember how it happened. When I started researching it for my book, I did not realize just how big of a huge deal this was. But my parents got a call from the hospital, Sick Kids Hospital, saying that there had been a tainted blood scandal, that I may have been exposed, and that I needed to be tested for HIV. And again, like it's one thing to experience this as a kid because, I don't know that what that meant really registered. It was, oh, you might have something, let's go get tested. But again, if I flip the script as a parent surviving heart surgery number 2, all this time back, only to get this phone call, your son may be exposed to this. It was the largest tainted blood scandal in Canadian history.
Yeah.
And
So
kids on
this
my own ward had gotten infected.
Yeah, so this was a huge national scandal. I'm a little older than you. I was 12 years old when this broke,
Hmm.
and like I remember the news stories. Like this was a constant thing on CBC. Like every day they brought this up, and the number of people affected. And it's like you say, the people who had received that tainted blood were people who had been in accidents, people who had serious diseases and things like that, people who had overcome amazing odds to end up with hepatitis C or HIV or
Hmm.
other bloodborne diseases that either dramatically shortened their lives or quite literally killed them in a very short span of time. So this was not a small thing. This was
No.
national news for
Yeah.
sure.
And because it can lay dormant for several years, I was tested in 85 and the test came back negative. I was also retested again in the early 90s and then again late 90s, again, just to be sure, just to be absolutely sure.
Yeah. So, and again, that's a testament to the times that all this was happening. Like in the mid 80s, they weren't even 100% sure either of like what HIV was and
Hmm.
the best ways of detecting it and so on. Really, it's by the early 90s that they really had a handle on it. So it doesn't surprise me that you had to keep getting these follow-ups to be
Yeah.
sure. So, so you dodged a bullet with the surgery, you dodged a bullet with HIV.
Mhm.
You're back in Regina. What happens?
So, my care was monitored much more closely. My parents actually moved from Saskatchewan to Belleville, Ontario. And the idea was it would be more convenient. We're closer to Sick Kids Hospital. I was more closely monitored. The surgery had gone well, but it was very apparent that that aortic valve kept narrowing. And every surgery where they'd open it up and put a patch in it narrowed. So in 1988, they did what was called a ballooning procedure, where they inserted a balloon up and they tried to expand the valve. And this period of time, I would say between 1985, 1990, I describe it as like this black cloud hanging over my childhood. The ballooning procedure worked, but all it had done was buy me some time. And it was now the talks turned to, look, we're going to have to do another open heart surgery. And the fear was, I'll be hitting puberty, 12, 13. That valve is going to constrict. He's going to be growing. So we need to take a very different approach. So that was a very difficult time because I had surgeries. They were major surgeries, and you'd recover and, oh, well, it worked, but we got to do it again.
So and then again, I have to believe that just your level of your consciousness level is only increasing with every year that's passing by. So when you talk about a black cloud, I mean, there's only so much, a 6, 7, 8-year-old can really conceptualize, life. But now you're getting into your preteen, teen years. You're beginning to have some higher order thoughts here, and you have a very good sense of what all this means.
Yeah, and I will say this too. It was in writing the book that I looked back and realized this isn't normal.
Mm.
But as a kid, like I had grown up hearing stories. I had surgery. I had another surgery. And then they say, you're going to have another one. So in a way, that was the norm. And I just accepted it. I didn't understand it. That was the norm. And 1990, I had another catheterization just to see the full extent. Sure enough, it's bad. That aortic valve is constricting. My mitral valve is doing great, but I start going into congestive heart failure again. So within a few weeks, I'm gaining 25 pounds like that. And it's difficult to walk and difficult to breathe. But this surgery, I had 3 days after my 14th birthday. I celebrated my birthday. We drove to Toronto. We stayed with Ray and Melody Foote at their house with their daughter Faith. And then I was admitted to the hospital the next day. This surgery was different. And I don't know if I would say I got excited about having surgery, but this one was different because the goal was not to expand the valve anymore. The valve was going to be removed and replaced with an artificial valve. So in my 14-year-old brain, I'm becoming like Darth Vader. I'm getting mechanical parts. I'm like bionic now. And that surgery, man, I'm alive by the power of prayer.
Mm.
Because that surgery was done. They had sewn me up, and I had internal bleeding that started and would not stop. And the church here back in Ottawa started a prayer chain, and people prayed around the clock. And there was one gentleman in our church that prayed, and at 9:45 he felt peace and stopped, and he says he's going to be better. And it was 9:45 when the blood stopped. And because the surgeons didn't know what to do, they thought, well, we're going to have to reopen him up. And they didn't know. But that's when it stopped. And that's when I turned a corner and started to recover.
So tell us about St. Jude.
So I got a mechanical valve, which was really cool until I woke up. And as typical fashion, I would say, what day is it? How did the surgery go? And I'm coherent, and I'm hearing this ticking sound. So I'm looking at my heart monitor. I'm looking at my wrist. I don't have a watch. What is that? And at no point had I been told, or maybe I was and I don't recall, but the valve actually ticks like a clock. And so it took some getting used to. Even the way my heart beats is different. It's like a heavy beat. It doesn't sound normal. But that was my introduction to my St. Jude mechanical valve, named St. Jude after the patron saint of lost causes. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I really enjoyed that part. I'm not gonna lie, I really enjoyed that part. So
Yeah.
your St. Jude is in. You did it again. You pulled through again.
Yeah. I'm ticking now. We come back to Ottawa. Now it's a 3-hour trip instead of a cross-country trip. I had tutors at home. I had missed a grand total of 72 days of school in ninth grade. Somehow I passed. But this surgery really is the turning point for me because now my aortic valve is staying open. I'm recovering. And now I can actually do things. Now I'm running for the first time and pushing. And I didn't want to stop there. There were many times in hospital I'd be watching Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee, and I'd say, "Man, look at these guys! If only I could do that."
Yeah.
It's such an impossible dream, but that really seed planted some ideas about, well, what does good health look like? What could it look like?
So we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna talk about what a man does when all of a sudden the dreams are accessible. You can reach out and touch them. We're gonna talk about that. What I wanted to just touch on though, how old are you at this point?
14 years old.
So yeah, so prime time started now, right? Like now you're becoming a man, right? So so describe life now. You've got your St. Jude in. All of a sudden you have what I would call capability, right? Like all of a sudden these doors that were shut hard, all of a sudden now you can creak them open.
Yeah.
So give me a sense of what life is like at this point, because I take it there's several years of this now, of this I'm living my life, right? Like
yeah. This is really where I would say life becomes very typical. I'm pushing my limits, I'm finding them. I'm excited. I'm doing things physically that I couldn't do before. And then life just kind of hums along. I graduate high school. I'm really torn. Do I go into art, which is what I'm really good at, what I love, or do I go into medicine because maybe I owe something to that industry? Maybe there's something that I should be doing with this gift of health that I've been given. I went into art. I went to college. I caught notice of a very pretty classmate, and we get married and we have children, and the way I describe it, life just kind of goes on. Growing up with those surgeries, it's now something I describe as, well, that happened when I was a kid.
I want to ask about that. Because it's like you said, now we're talking about like typical normal life, right? Like at what point did you realize, hey, I woke up today, I went through my day and I didn't think about my heart once. Like I did, like, like this thing that had consumed your life for such a huge chunk, the dark cloud that you talk about in the book.
Yeah.
Like at what point did you realize, hey, like I'm living my life. Like it's just,
I don't know that it was a single point. What I would try and do every year, because that third surgery, open heart surgery, was such a turning point. It was October 17th, 1990. Every October 17th, I would celebrate my surgiversary. And all that meant was I'd go back and look at pictures. I willfully remembered, hey, don't forget, this is where you came from. This was life.
Yeah.
And so I never really forgot it, but it faded.
Yeah.
It was all, it faded. And when Carly and I were married, I told her, you know what? I've had all these surgeries. They were really serious. There's always the possibility there may be more someday. Oh yeah, but it'll be fine. So it just became this thing that, oh yeah, I was that kid that had this, but I'm fine now. I was still getting checked once a year. I had graduated out of sick kids and was now being monitored at the here in Ottawa, but it was very mundane, very routine.
So again, the way you describe in the book, I love it. You're like a ship at sea, and it's fair weather, and you're just cruising along,
blue skies,
and then you notice a cloud.
What's that off in the distance?
Yeah. So what happened?
It's really funny. My wife and I moved to Embrun, Ontario, which is kind of a suburb of Ottawa. And we're walking one day and we're just kind of chatting. And I was kind of recounting my parents. And I said, look at everything that they've been through with me. And they've had other things in their life. And I kind of made this statement. I said, we're fools if we think we're just going to live here quietly for the rest of our life and everything's going to be fine. And it wasn't long after that I noticed I was getting bruising. And at the time, I had started pursuing that dream of doing martial arts and I was training. I couldn't compete in competition, but I could train. And that was great. That was great. But I noticed I had bruises. And then I noticed, hey, there's a lot of bruises. And then I started counting. There's 17 bruises that I've got. And I just attributed it to, well, I'm training too hard. I was taking my medication the next day because I have an artificial valve. I have to be on blood thinners. And every morning, my dosage, 5 milligram, 1 milligram. And I just pop it, and there it goes. I noticed one day, why are these two pills the same color? I looked them over. They both say 5.
Okay.
And then I realized I've been taking the wrong dose for probably a month. And then, so I thought, well, maybe I should get this checked out, at some point. And then I'm in the bathroom and I see blood in the toilet. And then I'm starting to think, I need to go get this checked now.
Yep. Because basically blood thinners, an overdose of blood thinners means that you're bleeding internally.
Bleeding internally. Had that been left unchecked, I would have died just from that.
Yeah.
So that, seeing my doctor, having my blood checked, getting it regulated, create a series of chain of events. And it turned out it had been an error from the pharmacy. They were terrified I might sue.
Yeah.
But what it uncovered, because they ordered a number of tests, I was sent for an MRI of my heart. Again, just to be sure nothing was wrong. And what that MRI uncovered was my aortic valve was fine, but the arch above it had swollen and was really enlarged. And suddenly they're talking, you're at severe risk for an aortic aneurysm.
Yeah.
And that hit me hard. And it didn't hit me so much that, okay, this is what I'm facing. It's what could have happened had this not been found.
So two points of clarification from my audience. The book describes this very well. First of all, an aneurysm with the aorta, like if you lose that artery, you're dead in very, very quickly. Your chances of surviving that are extraordinarily low. The other point is that I think it's important to point out that this aneurysm is not a consequence of the dosage mistake.
No,
but
good clarification.
Because of this dosage mistake, that led you to the hospital. The hospital did the checking, and that's when they found out that this other problem, this far more serious problem, is about to occur.
Yeah. And what it meant for me was after 27 years of not having heart surgery, I'd be back on the operating table. And again, I shouldn't get excited about this, but I was. They were going to remove my aortic valve, remove my aortic arch, and put one solid piece in. So it was, from my point of view, I was about to get this huge mechanical upgrade. And again, even as a grown man, I was 40 at the time. I'm like, this is pretty cool.
Danny 2.0.
Yeah. But again, it just brought back a lot of those memories. And, I knew what I'd be facing. This was a process I was very familiar with, but it was very new for my wife, for my children. They were in their teens. They were, 13 and 11 and 9. So they were young. And this was all brand new to them. But for me, I actually said, God, thank you. This is something that I can wrap my head around. Yes, I've got time to mentally prepare, which I did, but it wasn't something completely left field that I didn't know. I had no basis to process it from.
Danny, a precious moment in this book I really want you to touch on. You mentioned that the error in dosage was a pharmacy mistake, right?
Yeah.
Now, as far as mistakes go, this is a serious one, right?
Yeah.
Like when giving the wrong dosage of any medication, especially blood thinners, this is not oopsie. This is a major thing, and it is. I would imagine that most pharmacists would prepare for a serious lawsuit over something like that. I would like for you to share with my audience how you tackled this particular error from the pharmacy.
Yeah. So the fall of 2016 was just test after test after test. And in one conversation with my doctor, I brought up, was there any precedent? Not that I was planning on it, but I said, is this something people sue over? And he said, look, you haven't been hospitalized. You haven't lost time from work. I'd encourage you just to let it go. It was after that conversation and I was driving home that I realized the pharmacy and the pharmacist in particular has no idea any of this is going on. And they had been in the early days on the phone with me daily and my doctor, apologizing, getting everything corrected. They had changed several policies. So on my way home, I stopped at the pharmacy. And it really gave me perspective. I could be angry that it happened, or I could look beyond it. And so I found the pharmacist and I said, she saw me and she was nervous. What am I doing here? But I said, look, you're my guardian angel. Or no, I'm sorry. I said, do you believe in guardian angels? And she says, I don't know. I don't think she knew where I was going. And I said, look, you are my guardian angel. I said, if it had not been for this apparent mix-up, I'd be dead. I would have been training in martial arts or doing something and would have just dropped dead. And so I told her, I said, you are my guardian angel, and I'm thankful the way things have happened. And she was in tears. And it gave me a pause to think, this is how God works. It looks like an accident or it looks like a mistake. But then what it reveals, there are so many times I'm just thankful. God, thank you that this is how you uncovered this problem.
When I read that portion of the book, like, in my mind, I'm like, Christians, like, it's like, no, but like it's to you, it was a sweet, kind thing to do. For her, you had just loosened her from this jail she was probably living in, this anguish she was living in. Yes, she cried right there. And I'm sure when she went back home, she just felt that weight just drop. And what a beautiful thing to do to somebody. And I loved that story. I loved that story. And to me, like, putting a megaphone on stories like that, it's like more Christians need to do this sort of thing. In other words, like, to step outside yourself and to remind yourself that, hey, somebody might be suffering on my account and maybe I can help loosen that up a bit. I love that story. I love that story. So at this point, the dark clouds are back, right? Like, you're ready for it, but it's coming, right?
Yeah.
So walk me through everything that takes place from this diagnosis to the preparation to deal what could be a life-threatening disaster.
Yeah. So again, one of the mercies from this is I had time. So I got the diagnosis in late fall of 2016, and they said we're going to operate in March of 2017. So I had a few months to prepare. And I'm thankful for that because emotionally I was what I would say brittle. I just felt my emotions were right underneath. And so I cried a lot during that time. I prayed to God a lot and just said, God, what are you trying to do through this? What are you trying to show me? What is there? And
I want my audience here to really understand the tears here. So, how many children?
Got 3 children.
Okay. And at that point, how old are they?
Roughly about 13, 11, and 9.
Yeah. So we're talking young children. And for sure, that must be foremost on your mind.
There were several verses that I claimed during that time that I kind of held. And interestingly enough, in my own Bible reading, Psalm 112, 6 and 7 was a verse that I claimed. I didn't know that was the same verse my parents had claimed years ago when I first had my first surgery. But another verse that really grabbed me, I apologize for not knowing the exact reference, but it was something that Paul had said where another missionary was sick and he said, spare them, sorrow upon sorrow. And that became my prayer for my family. God, don't spare my life for me. Spare them to avoid my family sorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in those months of preparation, that fall and that winter, Luke, I felt like I had homework.
Yeah.
There were things that I needed to do. And I was convinced of this. I wanted to be as public about my surgery as possible because I knew I had students at college that were atheists or didn't care about God. I had church members. I had people that I trained with. People were going to be aware and they're going to be watching. And so there's almost a degree where I felt like I need to be a good ambassador in this. You've been given this to go through it well. And so I wanted to be public about it, but I found when people go through difficult diagnosis or difficult circumstances, other people listen. You have their ear. And it gave me a boldness just to share with people, hey, I love you and I want to share this with you. But part of that homework, I updated my will. I talked to my financial planner just because I didn't know how this would go. I was starting to get a heaviness in my chest as one of the symptoms. I had to stop all physical activity. So I felt like I had homework. I had preparation to do. So my wife and I think for her, it's starting to sink in a bit more now too. Okay, if I pass away, here's what you're going to do. We made a binder with all of our banking passwords, everything. So if I'm not there, you open it and you just start going through. And that, number one, gave me something to do, but it was a tremendous peace just to know I'm leaving my family prepared. And then the other thing that I did, and I really felt heavy, and this is one of the hardest things I've had to write. I felt this burden to write letters to my wife, to my children, in the event that I'm not there. Carly's letter was actually easy to write. I mean, we're very open. There's nothing I'm writing in her letter that she doesn't know. And it was just my hopes for, if I ever were to pass away, it was just what I hoped she would do. But man, those letters to my kids, my son, my oldest son, what do I want to see him become when he's 20 or 30? And what would I say to him if I was able to be there? And man, I cried and cried on those letters. My daughter, I'm thinking she's going to be married and I'm not there. And how will that, so I went through the work of just writing those. But Luke, it was amazing because it's like just think about everything you want to say to your kids, but maybe you can't, or everything you want to bestow on them, or everything you want to share, or what you hope for their life. I feel like that was a huge lens of just being able to share that with them. And then my instructions were, if I pass away, you give the letters to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was done the financial planning, the will, when I was done these letters, I felt like the homework's done. Now it's just wait.
Mm. So the affairs are in order.
Mm-hmm.
You're stepping into the hospital.
Yep.
What is that day like? You walk into that, like, at that point, are you like in your mind, let's do it. It's time.
Yeah, in this case, the God's peace came the closer I got to the surgery date, the more peace I had.
Mm.
And so I remember the night before, Carly and I went to bed. We both got a great night's sleep. We got up about 5 a.m. We drove to the hospital. We're there by 5:30. I'm checking in. My parents joined me. My brother was there and his wife, Faith. Our pastor was there. And so now they're meeting in the hallway with me in the gurney. And I'm surrounded by a circle of family and my brothers and sisters in Christ, and they're praying over me. And then I get wheeled away down the long hallway of a different hospital. And I remember Carly saying, "I love you." And I just stuck my thumb up like this. And we went down the hallway. I'm in the waiting room talking to the anesthesiologists. And then it's funny. I don't know why this struck me as funny, but I get wheeled into the operating room and I'm looking around like, this is a lot smaller than I remember. It was very narrow. But this time around for surgery, they put the needle in and they missed. They missed the vein. So they switched to the other hand. And they miss again. And so the last thing I remember is the doctor saying, "Okay, we're going to try the other hand." And that's my last thought.
And of course, you bring up quite a bit in your book your absolute hatred of needles. And of course, this has to happen.
Yeah, and my heart is racing. I'm like, I'm not going to start my 4th open heart surgery freaking out about needles, but there it was.
Yeah. So once again, we know how the story ends because I'm having a very nice conversation with one Danny Covey right now. But this was not an easy surgery. This was pretty serious. Can you describe the things that took place and the aftermath of what took place?
Yeah. I woke up not knowing what had taken place. I'm asking my questions. What day is it? How did it go? That "how did it go" question is what caught me this time. What I did not know is that beautiful plan of taking out my aortic valve and putting in a new one with an arch went horribly awry. As soon as the surgeon opened me up, my aortic arch had burst. And to this day, I have a hard time talking about this because they don't know when that arch burst. They can't say if it was days or hours or minutes. But at some point before I had surgery, my aortic arch had burst. And that surgery was a mad dash to save my life. I went 9 minutes without any blood or any oxygen going to my brain or body. And it was a fight to save my life. And I think when the surgeon came into the room to let my family know how it went, they describe he walked in and he just slumped down on the chair. And he said, we almost lost him. And I think especially for my wife, Carly, that's when the reality of all these stories, all these scenarios about, it could be serious. I think it just came crashing in. And that was a devastating moment, but it was also a moment where, God, thank you. Thank you.
So this surgery was several hours.
Several hours.
I want to say almost 12 from the book, but it maybe. So this is, they're fighting to keep you alive, and it seemed to be one problem after the other, and huge losses of blood. Really, I get from what I get from the text, a little bit more of a weight, and you're not recovering.
No.
You were right there.
Yeah, I was actually kept in a sleep-induced coma for a few extra days, just to try and give my body a chance.
Yeah.
So it was a very difficult surgery, but I think this surgery more than any other, when I woke up and they were telling me what happened, I had a hard time understanding, and I kept forgetting, and I was very just not coherent. But when I really understood, and this is several days later, just the impact, again, not of what had happened, what almost did happen. And Luke, at this point, I'm saying in my life, man, this has been 3 times now where I've almost died. Every surgery has inherent risk, but there's 3 that were very, very, very serious. And in a strange way, that's just twisting that knife of, Danny, what are you still doing here? Why are you still here? Why did God spare you? And that was not like, I'm excited. That's like, God, why? It became a difficult thing for me.
I find this interesting in the book. And now we'll skip ahead a little bit, and we're going to talk about survivor's guilt.
Okay.
Because it's clear from the book that survivor's guilt was always an aspect of your thinking. But it's interesting that from my perspective, I would have thought that you would have learned to have dealt with it over time. And yet it would seem that in your case, the survival guilt increased in magnitude with every passing trauma ultimately. And I think that you were probably worst off when it comes to survival's guilt with the last one, with the one that just happened here in 2016. Can you talk about like the psychology of that and what you attribute that to?
In a strange way, it's almost like if you play Russian roulette and you keep going, and part of you says, well, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. The other part of you says, my day's coming.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
And those seeds of what happened with Gaylord when I was younger, and then constantly being told growing up, wow, you're a miracle. It's a miracle what God's done in your life. And then, okay, I'm a miracle to do what? Go play on the monkey bars.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? Or God, what is it? Why have you spared me? And so survivor's guilt is actually something that I wrestled with throughout the book. And I say wrestled with because you don't get an answer. I don't come up with a happy bow and an answer. Here's why this happened. But I still think it's important to wrestle with it. But you're right. It's, every surgery that just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's really screaming at me now, Danny, what are you here for? You're 40 years old. You survived all these surgeries. What's the plan? And I like the way, and so, naturally I'm digging into my Bible. And at this point, the book of Ecclesiastes is really connecting with me. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And so I'm looking into that root word vanity, and what does it mean in the Hebrew? And the Hebrew word is hevel. And it's got a broad range of of meanings. Vain, it can mean an enigma, a mystery, something that's unknowable. And that's really what resonated with me. That's kind of the conclusion. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why this person lives. Why am I here and not Gaylord?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'll never know. It's hevel. It's unknowable. It's an enigma.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped me kind of take my focus away from the why to the what. And I think for anybody going through any kind of trauma, you will never, ever, ever get a satisfactory answer to why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
Why did my loved one pass away? Why do I have cancer? Why did my child die? Why do I have heart surgery? You'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
You may get some inkling of, God, what are you trying to teach me?
Mm-hmm.
What is the lesson here? And part of the lesson that, that I've taken away is I'm here because God's not done with me yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to share what he's done in my life with others who need that hope. That's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
God, you're teaching me gratitude. No, my health has not always been good, but I am grateful for what I have, and I need to share that with other people.
So, can you give me some practical some things that you put in practice in working out that survivor's guilt? You cite a few things. You get involved in certain people's lives, and that you attribute to this idea that you made it. Like you against all odds, you made it, and there's a certain. It's like you say, there's a certain responsibility that comes with that. There's a certain spirit that comes with that. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So at the time, I was reading a book called Move Towards the Mess. And it really seemed to coincide with what I was going through. And the gist of it was, when you see somebody going through a difficult situation, your natural inclination is, I don't know what to do. So you kind of back off. You pray from a distance, is how I would describe it. Where the idea of this book is, no, you charge in. You're going to make a mess. It's a mess. You're going to get, but that's what people need. And there were people in my life at that time who were going through very difficult things. And there were several of them. And my one friend, Matt, his wife, Sarah, was going through cancer, and she was fighting. She was going to beat it. And so my wife and I were there with her. We prayed with them. We tried to do practical things to help them. And that's another big thing. Don't just say, well, I wish I could do something. Go find something. Replace a light bulb in their house. Do something. Shovel their walk, like mow their lawn. Do something. Doesn't have to be big, but just do something tangible. And there were several people like that, like Sarah. But particularly for me, there was a girl that I trained with in Jiu Jitsu. Her name was Carrie Lynn. She was in the reserves. She was a black belt in Jiu Jitsu. She was a black belt in kickboxing. This woman was, she was graceful, but she was tough. And she was a bit higher ranked than me. And I always looked up to her. She was always very kind and friendly. I didn't really know her that well. She was diagnosed with a tumor behind her eye. And as soon as that happened, everyone knew. And I just felt, God, I don't know her, but man, I got to march into her life. And so I did. And I spent months visiting her in the hospital. She, would take inspiration from what I went through. And in my head, I'm thinking, there's no way I could go what you're going through. She was a marksman, and she was going to lose her eye. And her mentality was, I'll train on the other eye. I'm going to get through this. And it became apparent over several months she wouldn't get through it. And I'd always assumed my role in her life was to pray her back to wellness. And when I got the call from her mom, she said, Carrie Lynn's pretty sick. If you're going to come visit, you better do it soon. The next day, she had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And that, Luke, that was hard. I mean, really hard. I'm taking many walks alone, crying and saying, God, why? And her passing away is just another knife twist. Why am I still here? Why not her? She didn't deserve to die. I don't deserve to be here. And that's where that wrestling, I think particularly with her, it really came to a head, and it was very hard. And I spent time with her parents after she passed away, and we would just cry together. But I just felt like, God, you want me here to go through this with them. And over time, part of that survivor's guilt, and part of that is not that we have to, it's not that we pray people better. Sometimes it's just to give them hope at the end and point people to Christ as best you can at the end. And when I understood, you know what, I can't save Sarah, I can't save Levi, I can't save Avril, I can't save Carrie Lynn, but maybe my role in their life is just to be a comfort to them as they suffer, because I know it. I know that suffering.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Love it. No, this concept of running towards the mess. My life is rainbows and sunshine. Like I've had a few, I had my stint in the hospital as a young child, but nothing compared to, and I've always viewed my life as like, my burden is lighter than air. And around me, there are people with heavy burdens. I'm thinking to myself, man, if I can go alongside and just take half of it, then they get half, they get their burden halved, and I'm just carrying it along with them. Like I just had that mentality of like, you have it so good, why not? I love that concept. And I love how I can't think of a better way to work through survivor's guilt than that, because it's like putting it's putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like it's like, oh, you feel bad about that? Well, there's things you can do, and
like even my dad, when I was sick at home, he came by and he changed the light bulb in my shed. I'm like, Dad, I haven't been back there for weeks. He's like, I know.
Yeah.
And I look back and I'm like, he did something that I couldn't do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times now, if I know somebody's going to be in the hospital, they need a parking pass. Maybe if they're a Christian, maybe they'd appreciate having a Bible verse at the end of their bed. Maybe I can go do something at their house, or meals. Like there's things, small things that we can do. But writing about this whole process, wrestling with survivor's guilt, now I know if there's somebody in distress, Danny, just make a beeline to them. Maybe you get there and you don't know what to say, but you can just say, look, I'm here. And just be there.
Yeah. Awesome. This other question I have to ask, because this is the one part of your book I don't understand, in the sense that, like, my mind goes there immediately, but again, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but you claim in a couple of places in the book to not understand God's sovereignty, right? Like the idea that of the plan, right? And while I can understand the idea that we don't get, unlike your book, I can't turn to the last page and see, like we can't look at God's book and see how it all ends, right?
Yeah.
But that said, especially at the stage you're at now, surely you see how your life and the challenges of your life has acted like a strong gravitational field that has altered the lives of so many people. I'm going to bring it up right now. Ray and Melody were brought into the Covey sphere of influence because of you.
Yeah.
Your brother married Ray and Melody's daughter.
Yeah.
You have
Two worlds collide.
Exactly. The church we go to, founded by your dad, because he needed to be in Ontario because of you, right? To me, it's like you're a Jupiter, you're a gas giant of God's sovereignty. You know what I mean? Like in the sense that you can actually look in the rear view mirror and see, oh, that's what God was doing.
Yes.
And isn't that awesome?
It is now. And the process of writing, when I wrote that chapter on survivor's guilt, I was desperately struggling with survivor's guilt. Now I have that perspective that you're saying, that I can see, hey, there's God working all things together for good.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't see that in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But part of that, it's like Abraham, count the stars.
Yeah.
Those will be your offspring. Did he understand all that then? Probably not. And all I knew is when God placed the idea of writing a book on my heart started racing. I was terrified and I was exhilarated. And it was a challenge. And I knew, Danny, you have to do this. Because if you do, that's your answer to survivor's guilt. You're going to involve yourself. You're going to be a blessing. And when people write me almost daily saying, I cried, I laughed, your book has fundamentally changed how I look at things, I look at that and like, that's God working in the events of my life. It's not me. And that's my answer to survivor's guilt, is just be used by God. That's it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, if we'll bring it down just a notch. There's fun stuff I want to talk about. Like purely,
well, it's about time.
Purely childish fun stuff that are in your book, and brought a big smile to my face. Now, I mentioned we were going to talk about the Hasbro years.
Yeah.
And what I enjoyed about the Hasbro years is because I had not only Hasbro years, I had the same Hasbro years. And that's, like it's one of those things where you had to be alive, within 4 or 5 years there, right? And you had to probably be in Canada or northern United States, right? And to experience these things. G.I. Joe and the Transformers, right? Now, I don't know if you know this, Danny. If you didn't, I think I'll probably make your night here. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Hasbro has a YouTube channel. And do
Wow.
you know what Hasbro streams 24/7 on their YouTube channel?
Transformers.
G.I. Joe.
Oh, well, close.
Close. So, anyways, I figured I got to share this with Danny because we've had the same childhood. And I'll be honest with you, I may have watched an episode or two recently of G.I. Joe. I can't believe how kitsch it is now. But anyways,
I bought the DVDs for my kids a few years ago and we're watching it together. And my son looked up and he said, Dad, this isn't very good, is it? And I said, I didn't know whether to be, offended, or I'm like, yeah, it's not as good as I remember it.
And it's funny because Transformers, G.I. Joe, these toys. My sister had really severe asthma as a child, and she often had to go to the doctor, and the doctor meant needles and things like that. And so the deal was, when we went to the doctor, if we had a needle, afterwards we got to go to Giant Tiger and pick a Transformers or a GoBot if Transformers was too much money. And so I had a nice collection of
that's
of
good
Transformers
parenting right there.
Yeah. Another fun thing I like to talk about, and it has a little bit of depth to it, because and there's a great variety of opinions on this within Christianity.
Yeah.
I really appreciated your approach to it because it kind of reflects mine a little bit, but it's not one that's commonly put out there. This idea of there is a place for pop culture. There is a
Absolutely.
place we are men of our time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, you can go too far, right? Like you can fall into worldliness, you can fall into loving things that are of no profit. But at the same time, I was wondering if you could just share some thoughts on like what are the benefits of pop culture? What are the benefits of um the spirit of the time, if you said the culture of the time, obviously keeping sin out of it, but just the time period in which you grow up in. What are your thoughts around that as somebody who grew up in the faith?
Yeah. Pop culture changes week to week, month to month.
Hmm.
It's the shiny new thing. It's
Yeah,
the Baskin Robbins flavor of the month.
yeah.
And so that is constantly changing. The gospel does not.
Mm,
But the tools that we use to share the gospel can absolutely change. And
mm,
so I like looking at it like this. We point people to the cross through the culture that we're in.
mm,
So this culture may change. Wherever it's at, we're pointing to the cross. We're
mm,
pointing to the cross.
mm,
And so growing up, my dad would regularly go door to door.
mhm.
That doesn't work so well
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, no, no,
And,
yeah,
you know, in some ways, I feel like Instagram is the new door to door. If you want to
mhm,
reach kids, they're going to be on one of these.
yeah,
And we can lament that. We can say how terrible, or we can say, this is where we go. Maybe TikTok is the new vacation Bible school.
yeah,
So the methodology changes, the message does not. And I think that's really key. If I tried to do what my grandparents did and the means that they used, I don't know how effective it would be. So I think there's a measure where we need to be in the world, but not of the world, but speaking through the conduits, pointing people to the cross, because the cross does not change.
mm,
But how we share that, I remember my dad, we'd print like 10,000 cards and we'd go door to door and distribute them. And then one year we decided, I said, Dad, let's try a Facebook ad. And for $70, we got a wider range than we could have ever done before.
mhm,
It's constantly shifting. And
mm,
in 10 years it'll shift again. The broader value though is, I have a way that I can point people to God through a certain set of tools. And those tools are going to change. And those changing tools are going to be available to my children. Now my children have a better opportunity to point people to God, to share his message than I ever could.
mm,
And so I think the fact that culture is changing, great, because that means how my grandchildren reach the lost will look very different, but it's that same message.
mm,
And that's not a bad thing.
mm. Let's talk about martial arts
Subject close to my
because
heart.
this is it's interesting that the book obviously details the trials and tribulations of a heart problem, but right next to it is this line of martial arts and karate and jujitsu and the
Hmm.
desires of a young man to attain, to achieve. Talk about finding that thing you love. You know what I mean? Like whether it's martial arts, whether it's like I love nature photography. I could go out in the woods and get lost there for days. I won't eat, I won't drink. I'm like, um finding that thing that just your brain just says, yes, that.
I think for me, like I mentioned, from a hospital bed, I'd be watching Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan or Sammo Hung or Jean-Claude do these things. And I'm like, that's amazing. I didn't know people could do that, but I could never do that.
Mm,
And I think part of that is I had been so vulnerable and so open and so powerless or no control over what happened to me that I just basically I could control my attitude and my mind, and that was it. So now when I'm 13 and now I have a measure of health, now there's some agency involved where, hey, this thing I've always wanted to try, I can actually try it now. And it was terrifying for my parents. It was thrilling for me. And so the deal was always, yes, you can try this, but you're never going to compete. And I'm like, that's great.
Mm.
But that journey really started when I was young and I saw this karate book and I begged my dad, please, please, please let me buy this book. And so he bought it. And there I am with my shirt off doing homeschool karate. I've got the book in one hand and I'm looking in the mirror and this is a punch. That's how that dream started. It was just a baby, small first step. And I think that's huge. Whatever that itch is, whatever that thing you want to do, you can plan it all out, but you got to take a baby step. And for me, that's what that was. It was, you know what? No, I'm not that kid that can't do anything. I'm actually, throwing punches in front of my bedroom mirror. And then fast forward a few years, now I'm training in a dojo with other people and I'm enjoying it and I'm keeping up. To now as an adult, hey, I'm going to get that black belt. It was an impossible dream, but you just baby step your way through it.
Mm. I don't want to spoil too much of the book on that journey because it's really it's heartfelt. It makes you feel good, and I really want people to walk that journey through the book. It's really awesome. You mentioned the fear of your dad with the martial arts, and it's quite interesting. I had a conversation with your dad the last time he was in Ottawa, and the conversation was the conversation didn't go like I thought it was going to go. Because I said to him, I said, I just finished Danny's book. It was quite a good read. And I genuinely expected him to say, like, yep, you sure did it. That's my boy. And, like, I was kind of expecting him to do a victory dance, like, but instead what I got was, he said, yeah, reading that book, it just tested a few old wounds.
Yeah.
And and it gave me an appreciation. You paid a big price. The cost was high on your body, on your psychology, on your emotions. But the things that your parents went through, and I imagine your wife and your children, the people who are closest to you, like they took those wounds along with you. Like their hearts were damaged at the same level. So like I guess what I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as a father now, as a person who went through all this challenge and have come out of it successfully. When you think back, your parents, your friends, your siblings, your wife, your children, all these people that have been there, watched you, prayed for you, were in your corner and all that. Like, what are your thoughts about these precious people who are there? They're there. They're tied to you. They're invested in you. You hurt, they hurt. It's like, can you speak to that incredible bond?
I see it very differently, and writing helped me see it differently. I see my parents in a very different light now. Like I will say, growing up, because I was always the kid in crisis, I never had that usual teenage angst and friction because I always knew they were there for me when it was literally life and death. So they did not get the teenage drama that normally comes with growing up. They didn't get it from me. It did create friction with my siblings when I was younger, again, because I'm the kid in the limelight and they're the unwatered plants in the shadows. But now growing up, and, when I started writing, I didn't tell anyone except my parents. And so I asked them, I said, if you've got old medical records, if you can double check dates. And like you said, that was not, oh, great, we get to help them. It was tearing open old wounds that they had gone through. So it's been a difficult journey, I would say, for the three of us. But it's been healing because now it's, now we've got that tangible thing that I can hand somebody and say, I believe this will be a blessing to you. And they see, you know what, all that suffering that we've gone through, it's for something. And they never doubted that. But it's given me a huge appreciation is not the right word, but I look at them and I don't know that I could go through with one of my kids what they went through with me. I will 100% of the time be the patient every time. I will go through 10 more surgeries before my kids have to go through one. And that's where, my book is dedicated to my parents. Like they have been with me through every set of new scars. And it's, it's their story as much as mine.
I want to give you my my overall impressions of your book.
I'm going to brace myself here.
Yeah, no, I'm almost afraid to say it because I hope I don't disappoint you. I think it's a very human book. I didn't know what to expect when I read this book. Like I when sometimes somebody says a Christian gives you a book, I wrote a book, you're thinking, oh, this is going to be a Christian book. This is going to be a spiritual book. It's definitely a spiritual book. It's definitely a book by a Christian. There's no doubt there's Christian themes all over it. But I really believe an unbeliever reads this and understands it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's so human. It is so real. It is so like, sometimes my kids and I, we talk about things of the faith and sometimes say, well, in real life, and not saying that the faith isn't real life, but the tangible, the day to day, and from the karate to the Hasbro, to the surgeries, to the loved ones that are there through thick and thin, to the guilt, to the sense of duty, all these things, like it's all so instinctual and verifiable and like it's almost scientifically so. And again, I'm a very, very slow reader. I read this thing in I think a couple weeks because it was just like there's no point where I had to stop and go, wait, what do you mean by that? No, I get it. Like it's like, yeah, of course. Wow. And yeah, so to me, this is it is such a wonderful display of humanity at its best and things that I think almost anyone can grasp. I just find this is within reach of almost anyone.
Well, when I was writing, that was my prayer. Is I would at different points have different people in mind. That pastor friend of my dad who's been preaching for 30 years, can he get something out of it? My student who's struggling with everything from suicide to their sexuality to, violent parents, can they read it and get something out of it? And, one struggle I had even with my editors is my editor was a Christian, is you got to present the message. You got to present the gospel. And I said, no, at the end, when people are invested in the story, they'll be willing to hear it. If I preach, it's not going to work. And Richard Paul Evans, who I'd quoted earlier, he had said, if you're not willing to be 100% vulnerable to where if you're wrong in your judgment, you will make a complete fool of yourself. If you're not willing to just lay it out there and be vulnerable, you've got nothing to write about. You're just going to wax eloquently about things that you know, but you have to be vulnerable to connect with people. And that's why I literally, there's nothing in there there's nothing I went through that I have not shared, because something will connect with someone that's been through any kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And that was the approach. It has to be real. It has to be vulnerable. You know, if my worst enemies have all their ammunition if they want it now, but you have to be that vulnerable, and you have to be invested in a person's story before you're willing to share, you know, my point of view of where I come from as a Christian. I'm not bashing people over the head. I'm going to respect that you may have 1,000 different opinions out there. Here's mine. Here's the experience I went through. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something out of it.
It's clear from the book title that the overarching storyline of scar tissue is a call to take charge, right?
Yeah.
Being a victor, not a victim. When cast down, having the wherewithal to get back up, bearing scars, not wounds. And basically what I want to ask here is, how important was it, given the life you lived, to put forth this theme in your book, this theme of, yeah, bear the scars, not the wounds, victor, not victim?
Like when I started writing, I didn't have a title. I had that concept of scar tissue, but I didn't have the title. And literally, I read a fun fact about scars. And as soon as I read it, I kind of chuckled. And then I started tearing up because I'm like, that's my title. And the fun fact is that scar tissue is actually stronger than human tissue. And because there's no sweat glands, no blood vessels, it's stronger. When it heals, it is stronger. It's marred flesh, but it's stronger. And I thought, that's the concept, is we go through life, we get wounds. If we pick at them, if we don't let them heal, those will stay open wounds for years. If, however, we allow God to use them and we let them heal, that actually becomes something stronger. And that's when I realized that's the concept. It's not just physical scar tissue. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. It's saying, like, I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. These are my scars. I've been healed. Let me share them with you. And, you know, as a Christian, I think about Jesus' ultimate example. He came down to humanity to be our survival guide, to die on the cross, to rise again. He's our ultimate example of, look at my wounds, touch them. They're there as a reminder, but man, he's stronger on that side of the cross than the other.
Amen. Scar Tissue is truly, it's truly an inspiring book. I want to personally thank you to have written it, and for speaking with me today. I pray the Lord will give you much success with this wonderful book. I pray that, well, I pray for health and long life. And I pray that whatever circumstances the Lord brings in your life, Danny, that the Lord will bless you and yours abundantly. And
thank you, Luke. Yeah, I'm very grateful to be talking to you about this and just to share it with anyone that needs to hear it.
This has been a great interview. I can't wait to share this with my audience. And with them in mind, I want to thank you for watching, dear viewers. If you're interested in learning more about Danny, please visit his website at dannycovey.com. I'll put the link in the description of this video. Scar tissue can be, let's see, there we go. There we go. Scar tissue can be purchased from his website, and I believe Amazon.ca has it, Danny, is that correct?
Amazon.ca and Amazon.com.
Very good. And is there anything else, anywhere else you want to plug, people? Any social media, any places you want to put some eyes on?
I have a newsletter I write each month that some people may find interesting. So if you're curious, you can just go to my website and subscribe.
So that's dannycovey.com. And with that, dear friends, God bless you, and we'll see you later. Danny, you stick around right there, and we'll say our proper goodbyes. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.